Welcome to The Deepest Cut, a podcast about the movement from painful experiences to meaningful music. I'm your host, Matt Connor. Here on The Deepest Cut, we've asked various songwriters about the processing of their own grief or pain or sorrow into something they were willing to share with others, and the source so far has been their own experiences. But as we all know, it's quite possible to feel those same things, grief, pain, sorrow, when feeling the burdens of others as well. The added difficulty in such moments is found in knowing what to say, if anything at all, when the impulse is to want to help, to remove some of the pain, to make oneself useful for the situation at hand. All too often, we can end up making things worse. We've likely all felt the sting of someone who made our situation about them, or maybe even offered up some unhelpful platitude in response to it all. Singer-songwriter Zach Winters says the most difficult song from his new album, Shade of Indigo, is called When It Falls Apart, a song that took considerable time to finish because he knew he had to thread the needle carefully when figuring out what to say. It's a song that carries the grief of a friend and even offers up a response. And with that, he says, comes a very real responsibility to offer something substantive. Now, if you're familiar with Zach's music, you know this isn't much of a problem. Zach is a very gifted poet and wordsmith whose compositions feel like the sort of cinematic melodies in which you can really lose yourself. They're thoughtful and beautiful, and this song is no exception. It's a gift offered in grace to someone mired in grief. For this episode of The Deepest Cut, I reached out to Zach to chat with him about his newest set of songs, his new book of poetry, and the challenges of processing the grief of another responsibly. Here's our latest episode of The Deepest Cut with singer-songwriter Zach Winters. Hello and welcome to The Deepest Cut. My name is Matt Connor and I'm your host. For this session, I'm just so glad to be sitting here with Zach Winters. Zach, how are you today? And care to introduce yourself? How do you normally introduce yourself, by the way? Songwriter, you're also father of four. I'm sure you wear many hats.
I usually just say my name, and then I usually try to ask somebody about themselves.
To deflect back.
Yeah, just to keep things normal.
Well, thank you for carving out the time to be on the show here. Obviously, you want to talk about your music and get into really the whole gist of the podcast here. But I'd love to kind of pan the camera back if we could before we get into When It Falls Apart, because this is part of a new album, Shade of Indigo, came out this year. So all of this is pretty fresh. When I approach you about, hey, what's the most difficult song? Like, is that pretty easy for you to identify? Do you identify this because it's on the newest set of songs? How deep is that well for you of maybe difficult or painful material?
Uh, I've written a lot of songs relative to my previous self.
Okay.
I don't know, it's like 150 songs or something, and a lot of those came through some pain or something akin to pain. Not because I have a particularly pained life, but maybe because I'm sensitive in some ways. I don't know if it's the wiring or the water, but initially I didn't really want to do the podcast because trying to figure out how to fish out a song that would feel like there's also the thing that songwriters have to deal with of like there's kind of an interior life of the song, and that's what it means to me, and then there's the way other people will meet it. I've had a few people write specifically about this song already that they've resonated along a different narrative than I was writing from. And I was glad for them that it also kind of tasted like medicine in a good way. Yeah, so it was challenging. I'm like, well, do I pick this one from the birth of my first son that I wrote in the hospital and then couldn't finish because I was angry with God? But I eventually did try to hash it out with God, and I did finish that song. Or the one where my friend thought that their child had bone cancer, and I wrote To the Well, actually. I decided to just narrow it down to like this last record just to keep myself sane and be able to answer your question in one way.
By the way, I'm a little One, I'm glad that you said yes to this. I'm also wondering if you said yes just because my insistence to email you every like once a week until it made it happen or not. I didn't want the painful part of this podcast to be my insistence on you doing it. It was just meant to be the material itself.
Yes. No, I appreciate your persistence, and sometimes I need that. Especially, I like conversations, but interviews I always feel like I don't want to listen to them again because there's something that I would have added for context or whatever. But I'm also the kind of guy that's got like to make this conversation happen. I had to close out the browser and then bring it back up, and I was like, bring back up the history. And for me, I have something like 70 different tabs and different windows open. That's because the nature of my brain goes in that direction. So I've just I've got to sometimes provide some limiters around how I will, I don't know, respond or, yes. So it's good to just have this as a conversation, and whatever it does, good.
Sounds good. Sounds good. You said, there was the birth of my son, there was the bunk. I mean, has songwriting always been like a cathartic outlet for you? Or maybe the wrestling mat for spiritual things?
Yeah, I would say songs in themselves, music in itself, the holder of the tension which creates music itself, like to me it all feels like to me the wavelength that I'm on in my own head and songwriting world, and the art that I resonate with, and the poetry and the music tends to be in that space of longing, and that love and longing, and so a lot of what I write is in that place. I feel that maybe I could write, bubblegum pop songs if I tried, but I feel the need to mean what I'm saying and what I'm writing. So yeah, my songwriting does tend to be seated in that place, and a lot of that is wrestling through some spiritual things. Some, in particular, the few songs that I mentioned, and this one that we're going to talk about, are empathic songs, which means that it didn't happen directly to me, but I was so close that I felt some of the blast of it, and I don't usually set out to write songs. Like I need to write a song for my friend that's going through this, but it just sort of happens. There's just sort of like buildup of, I can tell my soul is generating a little song seed, and I realize that it needs to, give birth through song somehow.
By the way, is there a reason why none of the songs you brought up were things that happened to you?
The first one was with the birth of our son. He came at 35 weeks. We spent some time in the NICU. There was some emergency stuff around that was pretty tough. And we were told afterwards that we might not want to have any more kids because they thought this is what happened and it could be worse next time. And it turned out that couldn't have been the case. Like we went and saw genetic specialists, sent our blood up to Wisconsin to have some things checked and whatever. And yeah, it wasn't that. There's definitely, I did notice when I was thinking back through my songs that there are a number of, I don't know, those deep brooding, mulling over pain that are empathic as well. And maybe some of the ones that are that apply to me feel so vulnerable, or so in such a quiet place that they wouldn't necessarily occur as places that I would want to have much of a conversation, so much as for that sort of like devotional song to meet someone in their own quiet and pained place.
We want to talk about When It Falls Apart, but Shade of Indigo, is this like a newer batch of songs? Do these go back quite a ways?
Yeah, it actually came out the 24th of April, so like just a week and a half ago. Yeah, real fresh.
Are all the songs on it fresh to you, or are these collected from a way back?
They were all kind of from fall of 2022 to I don't know, I guess summer of 2023. So yeah, most of them are pretty fresh. There are some seeds of songs that are like were kind of in my little seed pouch that I had been carrying around a little bit, but most of the writing took place in that kind of fall to spring.
I love that word choice. Is that very much the way you view the craft? By the way, songcraft for you is a gardening.
Yeah, actually, I kind of stumbled into the metaphor, although I feel like so many natural things have a correlative idea in the lives of us humans. I do feel like the agricultural metaphor of with songs from their kind of seed form to what do you have when you've got like the nursery of plants? They're germinating. That's when I feel like I'm getting to know them and sitting down and figuring out what I want to plant in the garden that will eventually be like a new record or something. Right now I've taken them through that like maturation process. They're full grown and they're ready to like bring to market. So I'm the little farmer down the road that's going to be taking my melons out
I'm glad you carried that analogy all the way through.
all the way. And hopefully there's some good seeds in it that are organic and they're replantable in your own garden.
There it is.
It's a helpful metaphor for me to know which stage I'm in and embrace that and not feel like I need to be seed finding right now. Yeah, just to kind of stay in the agricultural metaphorical rhythm.
This song is one that you worked on for quite some time. Like I read you were writing about this song and basically said this may be the first song I worked on musically for this set and the last one I finished lyrically. Is that pretty uncommon amount of wrestling for you to for a song that you actually finish and release? And can you take us behind that?
I started writing this song not knowing really what it was directed at, what it wanted to say. We were camping up in Colorado, me and my family, and they had gone to sleep in the tent behind me. I was letting the embers die and playing my guitar in an open tuning, which I'm not that familiar with, but kind of fell into this circle and melody. And initially just had kind of a phrase that I nursed a little bit and ended up throwing into the seed pouch because it was time to go to sleep. When I revisited it, it felt like it was about a couple that had been married and gone through a divorce that I'm friends with, and I think it was challenging partially because in some ways I was stepping into that unasked and also wanting to give like proper emotional voice to some of those things I was kind of watching unfold in a painful way. So there was something about like both empathically like kind of feeling some of those things that were happening. And it wasn't the first time I've seen friends go through that kind of pain and separation and divorce, but it's a rough thing, and it's I think deeply disorienting. And so I in some ways I wanted to like have compassion, and I think the part that is really difficult to find the words that felt both like they were empathetic and compassionate and not presumptive, I guess. It's really challenging to know how to finish the song. I had a different bridge to it for a while that I floated out to a couple friends. They know and love me, and I trust their musical taste, and they're like, man, I feel that, but it doesn't quite feel right. I've had to do this with a few songs where I was like, all right, I've tried to kind of offer a landing and it feels sort of hollow, like a friend who's going through something that all you can say is, man, that sucks. I love you, and I don't really have any wisdom. I don't know how to give you comfort, and not all friends always need us to be that thing for them. Sometimes we just can't. So I ended up just kind of leaning into like, God, what would you say to her? That's how I was able to finish the bridge. It didn't feel like I was using my voice anymore. I guess in some ways I had to do this with a song from the last record, Time of Unknowns, where I was trying to comfort and I couldn't find it in myself. And I realized I needed comfort. I needed to hear that from an outside voice. That's kind of what ended up happening with this song as well, and how I was able to finish it out.
Were the bridges more hopeful that you like you said I had another bridge? Would like did it feel a little bit forced in that way? Like trying to put a bow on something?
Yeah, I think I was trying to put a bow on it, but I was also attempting to use some language that I had previously left untouched. It didn't land quite for me, even though I actually think people would enjoy singing that bridge probably more than this one, but not for the reasons that I would have hoped.
What was so striking to me about this? I mean, there are several striking things about it. One, it's just it's a beautiful song. It's a beautiful song. There's like an honoring of the experience in this way. Like inside it, you're asking, I'm still in the house, but where is home? Right? How does that feel to you trying to get inside their experience?
Yeah, it was that strange kind of dual life of being a songwriter. I'm myself, and I'm also kind of like stepping into, sometimes when somebody gives you a word that you didn't know, and you're like, oh my gosh, that's a perfect description for something I've experienced or know about. I just didn't have a word for it. In some ways, I felt like that was the process I was entering into. Like you said, like honoring the experience. I wrote a lot of verses for it because I was trying to find that right language, and because the melodic phrasing is kind of short, to both tell a story that is not trying to be. I'm not trying to create a narrative, but if you're on the inside of it emotionally, you should be able to feel like something of the arc of experience. Yeah, it was a challenge. I have not. I mean, my wife and I, when we were in college, we kind of went through this like codependency, and we like broke up from being friends, and that feeling of just emotional turmoil and instability, and kind of when you realize how interlinked your life was with someone else, and you're like trying to figure out what the gaps to plug, in your sinking ship of self. So I mean, in some ways I have some emotional reference points, and other ways I try to be like a good listener for friends who are going through stuff. So
Yeah, sure. It was great. It's a great song. By the way, can I ask this? Has the person who prompted this song heard the song?
I don't know, and I'm not going to ask. I'm curious, but I don't know if it's I've thought about sending it to them, but it feels so on the nose. It's like hey, you remember that time when you were like crying really hard in the bathroom? I took a picture of you. What do you think of it? So I don't know. We'll maybe someday I'll find out.
That totally makes sense, and yet I'm sure there's also that tension of if it could mean something to anyone, I meant for it to mean something for you, and therein lies that tension there.
It's strange because I don't, I guess I'm a little bit more guided by the empathic experience rather than an objective outcome of like when I was writing it, I didn't imagine her hearing it. And as I was finishing it or writing it, I did imagine it. And I was like, I don't know how she would feel. So it's just, it's out there though. So
Well, Zach, I would love to give you the chance to. Is there anything else you'd like to share about the song before we have you introduce it?
I recorded my stuff at home, and my friend Jesse Proctor, who's an amazing musician and drummer, played drums on there. And another friend, Nathan Culberson, played some of the electric guitar on there. The guitar that takes you into the bridge, that's him. I hope that whether or not people are able to resonate with the storyline that I wrote it around and the experience, that people do find some resonance with it.
Well, we'd love to have you introduce the song if you're up for it.
Yeah, this song is When It Falls Apart. It's on my new record, Shade of Indigo. I hope you enjoy it.
When it falls apart, do you remember falling into love with him? They say love is blind, or maybe it's just youth. Never second guess, and you shouldn't have to. A breaking of the faith, now you can't tell what's real. With a cut this deep, how could it heal? Don't blame you for hiding, don't blame you for lying to yourself just to get through for a while. Don't blame you for hiding, don't blame you for lying to yourself just to get through falls apart. Do you remember falling in love with him?
You've been listening to The Deepest Cut, part of the Rabbit Room Podcast Network. Audio production and theme music by Isaac Vining. Logo and identity work by Meg Cook. The Deepest Cut was created and hosted by me, Matt Connor. Thank you so much for listening.